I thought I would cover the symbolism of the Odysseus myth, and I chose the title Return to Ithaca because Damon often produces that clip at the summer school with the Sean Connery narration about journeying to Ithaca. So I thought that was quite nice. So, this evening's talk then. When we engage with mythic symbolism, it's important that we relate this to our own life. We should ask ourselves what the symbols mean to us, how they resonate with our own experiences. And on this basis, we gain a deeper understanding of the archetypal factors that the symbols of the myth in question are seeking to convey to us. Similarly, when we interpret myth, we should view this rather like a dreamscape, in that the scenarios in the myth do not necessarily follow on from each other in a linear or sequential fashion. It can be helpful to view the adventures of the mythic hero rather like a jigsaw mandala that we're seeking to assemble as a means of gaining insight into the challenges that we face on the spiritual path, whereby we are assisted towards becoming more psychologically whole. And when we tread the spiritual path as aspirants, we must emulate the courage and the heroism of the mythic hero. All who are exhorted to venture into the mythic landscape of the subjective psyche must display great courage, persistence, resourcefulness, and adaptability. These are fundamental requirements if we are to attain the higher initiations described by Theosophy. And when we embark upon the path, we respond to the call from within. We awaken to our ultimate destiny. The archetypal hero's journey is related to the very reason for the manifestation of the one life, of which we are all a part of, and to which we shall all ultimately return. The mythic hero commonly undergoes the entire spectrum of adventure, just as we do when we embark upon the spiritual path. There are undulating circumstances between tragedy and triumph, experienced by the hero within the mythic realm, and this is reflected in the life of us as aspirants. So when we tread the path, it's inevitable we will plumb the depths of our psyche in order to experience the ineffable glory and bliss of transcendence. And when we look at the symbolism of myth, we should be aware that the various characters found within the mythic landscape all reside within the human psyche. We have here helpful and obstructive gods and goddesses, fearsome monsters, false teachers, wise old men, wise old crones, helpful guides, whether these come in the form of beautiful maidens or divine messengers. These all symbolize archetypal psychic components found within each and every one of us. Whilst these manifest within our psyche and in corresponding circumstances in our outer lives in unique existential ways, all of these characters within the mythic realm describe underlying archetypal qualities and experiences common to us all. So the Iliad and its part sequel, the Odyssey, are the oldest existing works of Western literature. They are traditionally attributed to the blind bard from Ionia, Homer. The Odyssey, whose symbolism we're going to consider this evening, focuses primarily upon the Greek hero Odysseus and his 10-year journey home to regain his kingship in Ithaca after the Trojan War. The Trojan War being described mainly in the Iliad, the predecessor. And the Odyssey is a beautiful symbolic representation of the path of return, as the protagonist feels this inexorable urge to return to his home being the source of his being. This mirrors what in Theosophy we describe as divine unrest, when we are no longer satisfied by the transient affairs of mundane life, due to the soul's appetite for experience in the material world being sated. In this myth, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the goddess Athena. Goddess figures in myths symbolize deity manifest, and it's the role of the archetypal goddess to ensure that we, as monads, realize our full potential by unfolding previously latent spiritual qualities. And towards these ends, the goddess tests us, but also assists us. This is my favorite quote from The Voice of the Silence, which I think describes this beautifully. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. And she will open wide before thee the portals of her secret chambers, lay bare before thy gaze the treasures hidden in the very depths of her pure virgin bosom. Unsullied by the hand of matter, she shows her treasures only to the eye of spirit, the eye which never closes, the eye for which there is no veil in all her kingdoms. So Odysseus sets sail from Troy. He first embarks at Ismarus on the south coast of Thrace, which is modern-day Bulgaria. This is the residence of the Sisones, whom Odysseus and his men attack, slaying many of them whilst taking their women as slaves. During the daytime, as the sun is waxing, Odysseus and his men are able to hold their ground. However, when the sun wanes at nighttime, the Sisones prevail. Sisonian reinforcements arrive, attacking and killing 6 invaders from each of the ships of Odysseus, and he and his men set sail, fleeing the scene. So we have here the symbolism of the waxing and waning of the sun and its influence in respect of the conflict. And this illustrates when treading the path, our old, previous way of life is ineffectual when we have to engage with subjective realms of our being. The courage and heroism displayed by Odysseus in the outer world, as represented by the waxing of the sun, must now be directed appropriately towards confronting the obstacles and challenges found within the psyche, symbolized by the sun's waning. And when we tread the path, the sun must effectively set upon our old way of life, whereby we descend into a realm beneath the horizon, that is, subjective level of our being. This entails us successfully undergoing the transition between the first and second half of our life, whereby the precedence of the objective world then gives way to subjective matters as the needs of the personality are replaced by those of the soul or higher self. So Odysseus undergoes a harsh lesson here. And when we consider this myth and we look at his various crewmen, they are symbolic of components of the psyche that must be cast aside during the course of spiritual transformation. So Odysseus and his remaining men are then subjected to violent storms and fierce winds that drive them onto the Libyan promontory. This is the land of the lotus eaters. The natives offer fruit to Odysseus's men, who accept this, and the lotus eating causes them to lose all memory of their homeward journey. Odysseus himself overcomes the temptation of tasting the lotus and forcibly returns the men to the ships, as you can see on the illustration here. So the fruit of the lotus eaters casts a spell of Maya upon the crewmen, who may be held to represent aspects of the psyche susceptible to regressive yearnings for the previous easier and more comfortable life of the personality when it is immersed in the illusion of the material world. Or alternatively, the symbolism of the fruit of the lotus eaters represents spiritual labis related to the imbibing and subsequent effects of hallucinogenic psychoactive substances. The lure and seduction of such shortcuts serve to ensnare and deflect the neophyte from the goal of expressing the intent of the soul. Whilst there is no argument that psychedelic drug experience can serve to inspire one towards thereafter undertaking serious forms of spiritual development based upon time-honored traditional approaches, it's important to be aware, at least this is only my opinion, that the taking of psychoactive substances is hazardous and foolhardy. One is highly susceptible to the illusory effects of the astral plane. Also, such practice is very likely to exert distorted effects upon our physiology, especially the nervous system in the etheric chakras. So Odysseus returns the crewmen to their ships using force of will. And of course, we cannot overemphasize the importance of the use of will in the process of spiritual transformation. The ships sail on and embark upon the island of the Cyclops. Odysseus and his crewmen enter a large cave where they light a fire, make themselves at home. Unbeknown to them, the cave belongs to a Cyclops named Polyphemus. The giant arrives home and seals the cave entrance with a large stone, which only he possesses sufficient strength to remove. Polyphemus devours 2 of Odysseus's men. The next morning he eats 2 more men before leaving the cave to graze his sheep. Odysseus and his companions sharpen a stake, place one end in the fire, and thereafter conceal it under a dung heap. When Polyphemus returns in the evening, he devours a further 2 men. Odysseus then offers him the powerful undiluted wine which he had been given by Maro, the priest of Apollo, whom he had spared while slaughtering the Sicynes. Polyphemus greedily consumes the wine, becoming drunk. The Cyclops asks Odysseus for his name. Odysseus replies, Udus, which means nobody. When Polyphemus falls into a drunken sleep, Odysseus and his men heat the stake in the embers of the fire, then drive it into the single eye of the Cyclops. Polyphemus then cries to his fellow giants for help, saying that nobody has hurt him, and they believe him to be suffering from divine affliction, and they recommend that he pray. In the morning, the blinded Cyclops lets his sheep out to graze whilst touching their backs to ensure that the men are not escaping. However, Odysseus and his companions have tied themselves to the underbellies of the sheep, thus evading Polyphemus. As the ship sets sail, Odysseus arrogantly shouts his name to Polyphemus, who casts a huge stone at the ship, which misses narrowly. Now in possession of the name of Odysseus, the Cyclops prays to his father Poseidon for revenge. So the cave into which Odysseus and his men enter may be held to represent the lower realms of the unconscious. Polyphemus and his fellow Cyclops are uncivilized and bereft of any rule of law, as are the components found within the primal depths of the psyche. And when seeking to effect spiritual transformation, we must render ourselves invisible to the denizens of the lower unconscious. And of course, we do this through a process of purification where we undertake our spiritual disciplines, including, of course, meditation. This is symbolized by the fact that Polyphemus does not know the hero's name, at least not until Odysseus displays hubris when he departs the island. Removing the Cyclops' eye is representative of one being able to dissociate from the lower aspects of the psyche, again through one pointed focus of will, whereby the limitations of vision symbolized by the one-eyed Cyclops are overcome. So Odysseus displays intelligence, wisdom, and ingenuity to escape Polyphemus. And when we are able to elevate our consciousness to the higher spiritual planes, our resonance is impervious to the effects of the lower realms of our being. These lower astral components, which serve as threshold guardians, are unable to cause the substance of the mind to constellate around them. whereby we become imprisoned. However, Odysseus has displayed hubris, which of course is anathema to one treading the path, and repercussions shall follow here. Travelling north, Odysseus reaches Aeolia, ruled by Aeolus, a keeper of the winds. Aeolus provides Odysseus with hospitality for 1 month, then gives Odysseus and his men a gentle west wind to carry them home to Ithaca. Aeolus also provides them with a bag containing the other winds. He advises Odysseus that if he is required to change course, he should release the appropriate wind. However, whilst Odysseus is asleep, his crew foolishly open the bag, believing it contains gold. A violent storm then erupts, driving the ships back to Aeolia, where Aeolus refuses to provide any further assistance, as he believes that the gods do not favour Odysseus and his crew. So the actions of the crewmen here symbolize aspects of the personality that are not as yet sufficiently harnessed to the intent of the soul. The allure of the transient riches of the material world creates a diversion from the hero's intended spiritual course. The aspirant is as yet lacking the necessary spiritual focus and psychological integration to effect a return to one's origins. So here we see spiritual gifts being misappropriated for personal rather than spiritual ends, which to me brings to mind the famous phrase of Advaita Vedanta, desire nothing for the separated self. Very important when we tread the path. So after a voyage of 7 days, Odysseus and his men arrive at the land ruled by King Lamus, the domain of the giant and cannibalistic Lestrigones. The giants devour many of the men and destroy 11 of the 12 ships by launching rocks from the high cliffs of their island. Only the ship of Odysseus and its crew are able to escape, as this is concealed in a cove close to the shore. The number 12, of course, is significant in that there are 12 zodiacal signs, and the wheel of the zodiac plays a central role throughout the entire journey of the soul upon the wheel of rebirth. And the symbolism of the ships being reduced from 12 to 1 indicates that the hero's personality has undergone sufficient experience and psychological integration to now be subjected to experiences that can equip one in terms of the higher initiations. This process is represented by the further adventures of the questing hero in his single ship, sailing upon the waters of the unconscious, seeking return to his homeland of Ithaca. The remaining vessel travels east, eventually reaching the island of Aea. This island is ruled by the enchantress Circe. And after the casting of lots, Odysseus' mate Eurylochus and 22 others venture onto the island, whilst the others remain aboard the ship. The reconnaissance party arrive at the palace of Circe, which is surrounded by lions and wolves that are rendered benign by her sorcery. The party enter the palace except Eurylochus, who suspects something treacherous is going on. Circe invites the men to feast, but the fare is laced with one of her magical potions. As the men begin to eat, Circe transforms them into swine with her magic wand. Eurylochus witnesses this and escapes, returning to the ship of Odysseus and recounting the misfortune here to the hero, who sets off to rescue his men. On his way, Odysseus encounters the god Hermes under the guise of a young man who warns him of Circe's powers. The messenger of the gods advises him to confront the sorceress as a teacher of life's mysteries rather than a witch or enchantress. Important symbolism here. And Hermes provides Odysseus with an antidote to Circe's potion. This is a plant that is exclusive to the gods. It is called moly, M-O-L-Y. It possesses a white flower and a black root. So Odysseus then encounters Circe, who offers him to feast in the same manner as she did the men. However, having smelt the moly plant, Odysseus is immune to Circe's powers as she strikes him with her wand. Odysseus then draws his sword, and the sorceress falls at his feet, begging forgiveness, inviting him to reign with her on the island. Odysseus does not initially respond to her advances until she agrees to transform his men back to their human form. He does this, and they stay there for a year before departing the island. However, before he can proceed further, Odysseus must visit the underworld and consult the spirit of the deceased seer Tiresias so that he may ascertain how to successfully return to Ithaca. So the experiences of Odysseus and his men upon the island of Circe represent an initiatory process where the goddess principle and the energies of the unconscious are symbolized by the sorcerers. Of course, we witness the support of Hermes here, the psychopomp or guide of souls, who provides Odysseus with the moly plant. The combination of the moly plant's colors of black and white suggests a unification between the light and dark within the human psyche. This alludes to the nigredo phase of the alchemists, which is related to the integration of the Jungian shadow, comprising the hidden, repressed, mainly inferior, and guilt-laden aspects of the psyche, which, of course, we commonly project onto others. So the moly plant is exclusive to the gods. It comes to Odysseus by grace. He has committed himself to the voyage home and has displayed the necessary courage and attributes whereby he earns divine assistance. And when we tread the path, we are tested within the archetypal realm of the goddess and her powers of Maya, represented here by Circe. And she will only reveal her secrets to us when we demonstrate sufficient worthiness. Hermes advises Odysseus to draw his sword when Circe taps him with her rod. The sword is a symbol of discrimination, the ability of the mind to discriminate between that which is transient and that which is truly spiritual. And this allows Odysseus to undergo the initiation offered by the goddess. The transforming of the men of Odysseus into pigs and their return to a human state represents undeveloped instinctual aspects of the hero's psyche undergoing transformation through the initiatory process. So Circe assists Odysseus in his journey. She provides a favorable wind. He reaches Persephone's grove, the entrance to the underworld. And on the advice of Circe, he digs a trench and sacrifices a young ram and a black ewe to Hades and Persephone. The animal's blood flows into the pit below, attracting the spirits from Hades who congregate to drink this. Since primitive times, blood was considered to be the seat of life. It was believed that the shades of the dead in Hades could be restored briefly to some semblance of life by giving them blood to drink. Elpenor, a deceased member of the crew of Odysseus, is the first to appear. He requests that Odysseus erects a burial mound in his honor, to which Odysseus readily agrees. Odysseus then glimpses the shade of his mother Anticlea, whose death he was unaware of. Then Tiresias appears and gratefully sips the blood before offering Odysseus advice. So Circe has advised Odysseus that he must speak with this blind androgynous prophet or seer, who will be able to furnish him with the mysteries of past and future, the conundrum of birth and death. The seer is androgynous, symbolic of the need for us to unify the masculine and feminine aspects of our psyche. This is part of Jung's individuation process. When we do this, we enhance our perception of and our receptivity to the higher planes of consciousness and our capacity to attain the higher initiations described by the great theosophical teachings. Tiresias then also functions as a psychopomp, assuming the role of Hermes. It's interesting to note that in indigenous shamanic cultures, one of indeterminate sexuality has access to higher knowledge. The shaman in these cultures, he performs the role of the guide of souls by functioning as an intermediary between the inner and outer world. So Tiresias warns Odysseus to keep his men under firm control when they reach the island of the sun god Helios, so that they are not tempted to steal his cattle. Odysseus is also advised of the great challenges that will confront him when he arrives home to Ithaca. Odysseus thanks the sage and promises him the blood of another black ewe upon his return to Ithaca. He then allows his mother to drink the blood from his sacrifice. She reveals to him that his faithful wife Penelope, whom we see on the classic Waterhouse image here, Penelope is being pursued by suitors and that his son Telemachus is helpless against them. So through his deeply transformative experience in the underworld, the depths of the psyche, Odysseus becomes aware of the challenges that he must face to return to the source of his being. And we too must descend into the unconscious if we are to return to the source of our being, dealing with the forces there effectively. So upon returning to Circe's island, the sorceress advises Odysseus of the remaining stages of his voyage, offering advice as to how he may negotiate these. Firstly, he is required to pass the sirens, whose beautiful enchanting voices cause sailors to shipwreck on the rocky coast of their island. Following Circe's advice, Odysseus plugs the ears of his crew with beeswax whilst he fastens himself to the ship's mast, as we can see on the classic Waterhouse painting here. The sweet and seductive song of the sirens promises Odysseus knowledge of all future events on earth, and he shouts to his men to release him under the threat of death. However, his men adhere to his earlier commands and tighten his bonds. The ship then safely passes the island of the sirens. So the sirens may be held to symbolize Maya in its various guises, and also the seductive powers of the unconscious in the form of the illusory energies of the astral and lower mental planes. And Odysseus bypasses the siren song by subjecting the crew, symbolizing the five senses, to the force of his will by virtue of stuffing their ears with beeswax. This suggests a pratyahara stage of meditation, the fifth stage of the 8 limbs of yoga found in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is where we effect the withdrawal of the senses as a prelude to the following 6th stage of dharana, or focus, which leads to the 7th stage of dhyana, where the uninterrupted flow of concentration leads to the individual and one's object of concentration being as one. This culminates, of course, in the final 8th stage of samadhi, where one attains a non-dual state of consciousness, whereby one is completely aware of the present moment, experience omnipotence, omniscience, timelessness, ecstasy, and unity with all life. Gosh, it sounds so easy when you just read them out like that, doesn't it? So Odysseus uses beeswax to render his crew oblivious to the siren song. This is a symbol of purification and one's receptivity to the spiritual planes of consciousness. Bees were sacred to the Druids, who considered them to be divine messengers. Honey was used to produce mead, their sacred drink. In fact, bees were generally revered in ancient civilizations due to their ability to pollinate crops and flowers. The Olympian gods feasted on honey as well as ambrosia, with bees being connected to the inspirational muses of the sun god Apollo. The bee also served as an emblem for the priestesses of ancient Greece. And commenting on Odysseus being lashed to the mast, here's a quote by Edward de Dinger from his excellent book, The Eternal Drama, The Inner Meaning of Greek Mythology. The image has many echoes. Even in medieval times, Odysseus lashed to the mast was compared to Christ on the cross. The alchemical image of the mercurial serpent nailed or transfixed to a tree relates to the operation of coagulatio in alchemy. This is the stage of the alchemical process where, after the personality being deconstructed, it is then reassembled at a higher point of consciousness so that it is receptive to the energies of the soul. Because this occurs after we are able to achieve personality integration, where our mental, astral, and physical bodies truly function as one and in accord with the intent of the soul. As he ventures onwards, Odysseus is required to pass between two cliffs harboring two female monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is a six-headed, man-eating, dog-like monster who dwells in a cave high upon one of the cliffs. Charybdis manifests as a sucking whirlpool. In the effort to steer away from Charybdis, Odysseus' ship veers too close to Scylla, who devours 6 of the crew. So these two monsters represent the trials of the goddess as a symbol of deity manifest. When we tread the path, we are inevitably challenged to demonstrate our worthiness towards undergoing her higher initiations. The passage between Scylla and Charybdis alludes to us treading the middle way, also referred to as the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism that leads to liberation. It indicates the requirement of balance and poise when we are faced with challenges in our lives. And of course, to effect such a journey requires a high degree of psychological integration. Odysseus then lands on the island of Thrinacia. Despite the advice of Tiresias and Circe, Odysseus's men hunt down and slaughter cattle belonging to Helios. Responding to the sun god's protestations, and seeing that Odysseus has set sail, Zeus evokes a furious storm that drowns all of the crew except Odysseus. The venturing hero has now lost his ship and his crew. He is sucked towards the whirlpool of Charybdis, but he manages to avoid this by grabbing onto a fig leaf growing from the cliff. So again, we see symbolism emphasizing the great Vedanta phrase of desire nothing for the separated self. Spiritual energy is misappropriated. This time it is represented by the property of the sun god. And of course, when we tread the path, desire nothing for the separated self. So the crewmen have now gone. These unintegrated components of the psyche have been shed. Whenever Zeus appears in this hero myth as the supreme Olympian, he is symbolic of our spiritual essence, the monad, and his actions have contributed here to the divestiture of these secondary aspects of the hero's being as a necessary requirement to proceed further on the quest. So Odysseus is now alone and drifts on the water for 9 days before he is cast ashore on the island of Ogygia, the home of the nymph Calypso. He is provided with food and drink, and he becomes her lover. The word eclipse is derived from Calypso. It means concealment. The lunar eclipse occurs at the full moon when the sun, moon, and earth are aligned in syzygy. Great alchemical word, of course. It alludes to the individuation of Jung, or the transformation from base metal to gold of the alchemists through their sacred marriage, where the opposites of manifestation are unified. So during his stay on the island of Calypso, Odysseus undergoes a period of rest, reflection, and renewal, as the goddess energies, symbolized by Calypso, assist him in assimilating and integrating the experiences he has undergone and the lessons he has learned upon his spiritual quest. Calypso protects and nurtures Odysseus, who dies only to his lesser selves and is reborn to the intent of the higher self, which he can now pursue exclusively. Odysseus spends 7 years on the island with Calypso before he longs to return to Ithaca and reunite with his wife Penelope. And at the behest of Athena, Zeus sends Hermes to order Calypso to release him. The goddess grudgingly obeys, despite making one last attempt to persuade the hero to stay, citing her superior beauty to his wife Penelope. However, Odysseus is aware of the need to travel homewards. So Zeus, as a symbol of the monad, is beckoning the spiritual aspirant towards a return to the source of one's being, and the message is conveyed by Hermes, a divine messenger, the aspect of the higher self that communicates with us through dreams and meditation symbolism. However, it is the goddess Athena who is instrumental in ensuring that Odysseus proceeds on his journey homeward. Again, it emphasizes the importance of the goddess as a symbol of deity manifest, where the energies and processes of creation interact with the objectives of the spiritual aspirant as a means of enabling spirit to realize its evolutionary intent. So Odysseus leaves Ogygia upon a raft prepared by Hermes and aided by a wind bestowed by Calypso. Poseidon spies Odysseus at sea and evokes a terrible storm as an act of revenge for his son Polyphemus. Odysseus is cast adrift in the turbulent waters, his raft being destroyed, but he is saved by the goddess Ino, who provides him with a veil, enabling him to survive the raging currents as Athena sends a wind to flatten these. So again, we are witnessing the hero being subjected to the forces of the unconscious, symbolized by the sea. And in this instance, it is the feminine or goddess principle that rescues him. And again, HPB's famous quote, I won't read it a second time, but I just think it's so incredibly apposite. So Odysseus swims onward before being cast ashore on the island of the Phaeacians. He lays exhausted by the beach as Nausicaa, the daughter of the Phaeacian king Alcinous, and her handmaidens arrive at the seashore to wash clothes and play with a ball. Their games awaken Odysseus, whose appearance terrifies the handmaidens who run away. He then begs Nausicaa for assistance. The 15-year-old Nausicaa is emboldened by Athena, who has previously conveyed a romantic dream to her relating to her obtaining a husband. And Nausicaa believes that this may be Odysseus and calls back her handmaidens. She provides the hero with food and clothes after he bathes himself. Nausicaa then takes Odysseus to the grove of Athena, where he prays that he will be looked upon kindly by the Phaeacians. Odysseus then encounters the goddess in the guise of a young girl, and unbeknown to him, Athena enshrouds him in a mist that hides him from the gaze of the Phaeacians as he walks through their beautiful kingdom before arriving at the palace of King Alcinous. Nausicaa has advised Odysseus to plead mercy with the king's wife, Queen Arete, who is wiser than her husband and who trusts her judgment. Odysseus wins Arete's approval, and the king receives him with hospitality. He describes his various adventures to the court, and Alcinous provides Odysseus with a ship and rowers to allow his return to Ithaca. So we have Nausicaa as a young, beautiful, potential lover of Odysseus. Whilst his love is unrequited, Nausicaa plays an important role in assisting him in his return to Ithaca. In many ways, she fulfills the function of the Jungian anima as a spiritual guide. So Odysseus travels to Ithaca, arriving at a cove referred to as the Cave of the Nymphs, where he receives further counsel from Athena, who advises him to adopt the disguise of a beggar so that he may ascertain the happenings on the island that have occurred during his absence. So the Cave of the Nymphs possesses two entrances. The northern one relates to the Tropic of Cancer. The southern one is associated with the opposite Tropic of Capricorn. And Theosophy and related teachings describe the water sign of Cancer as the gateway to incarnation, where the soul first adopts a human form. The opposing sign of Capricorn is, of course, the sign of initiation, where one, through outstanding acts of service and immense self-sacrifice, attains progressively higher states of consciousness, culminating in liberation from the wheel of rebirth. The Neoplatonic philosopher Porphyry describes the symbolic significance of the cave in his essay, unsurprisingly titled On the Cave of the Nymphs. He perceives the cave as a meeting point between heaven and earth, where souls descend into matter, clothed in corporeal form, by the naiads, the residents of the cave, what in Theosophy we would call devas, who create the personality structures appropriate for the incarnation at hand. The Cave of the Nymphs is related to the interface between transcendence and manifest creation, what the mythographer Joseph Campbell called the world navel. And it is by virtue of the meeting of Odysseus with Athena, again, the symbol of deity manifest, and who holds the keys to life's secrets, that he is equipped to proceed further on the path and ultimately to union with his wife Penelope. So Odysseus adopts a disguise of a vagrant. We're familiar with this symbolism, of course, Jesus riding on the donkey, symbolizing the requirement of humility when we tread the path. The symbolism of the beggar also emphasizes that one is not attached to one's appearance or the manner in which one may be perceived by others. He's not shopping at Harvey Nichols here. You know, he's well beyond all that and not going for the designer labels. So Odysseus's wife Penelope is being pursued by suitors who have agreed to murder their son Telemachus. Penelope has managed to repel their advances under the pretense that she is preoccupied in weaving a burial shroud for Laertes, Laertes being Odysseus's father, and that she will not consider marriage to any of them until this is complete. The astute Penelope prolongs her labor by weaving during the day, then unraveling her work by night. So Athena is the goddess of weaving, and symbolically this process describes the interaction between the warp of the various planes of consciousness and the weft of the activity of humanity, both individually and collectively upon these. The objectives of the soul in unfolding its symbolic lotus petals are realized by means of this symbolic weaving within the realm of the goddess. So the hordes of suitors, whose advances Penelope stealthily repels, create a situation within Ithaca, which in my opinion is reminiscent of the wasteland of the Grail legends. This Celtic motif, which symbolizes spiritual aridity, is of course relieved by the questing knight attaining the Grail being a representation of the higher self. And in the Odysseus myth, Ithaca must undergo a process of redemption by the hero overcoming the suitors. and it is the support of Athena that will enable him to prevail. So Odysseus visits the hut of one of his former slaves, the swineherd Eumaeus. Telemachus arrives, having evaded murder by the plotting suitors. On the advice of Athena, Odysseus reveals himself to Telemachus before the goddess restores his disguise. The father and son then devise a plan that will vanquish the suitors. Telemachus returns to the palace to keep watch over the suitors and to await his father's arrival disguised as a beggar. When he reaches the palace court, Odysseus is recognized by his faithful dog Argos, who then expires. And before proceeding to meet his wife, Odysseus instructs Telemachus to remove the spears in the banqueting hall and to store these in the armory. He meets Penelope in his disguise as a beggar and leads her to believe that he has recently met Odysseus. He advises her that her husband will soon return to Ithaca. A banquet is held the following day, where Penelope announces to her suitors that whoever can string the bow of Odysseus, then shoot an arrow through 12 axe shafts, may win a hand. None of the suitors are able to string the bow. There's a bit of sword in the stone symbolism here. Then, to their derision, the beggar seizes the bow and easily strings it. He then fires arrows through each of the 12 axe shafts. Telemachus, who had previously left the hall, re-enters with a sword and spear. Odysseus reveals his true identity before firing an arrow through the neck of Antinous, the most disrespectful of the suitors who has been drinking from his cup. The suitors rush towards the walls of the hall, seeking to gather their spears, only to find them missing. With the assistance of Telemachus, Odysseus slays the other suitors. Athena, under the guise of a swallow, flies around the hall until all the suitors are vanquished. Odysseus then reveals himself to Penelope, who fears he is a god in disguise. To ascertain the truth, he asks Euryclea to move the bed in the bridal chamber. Odysseus protests that this cannot be done, as he himself made the bed, which consists of a living olive tree. Penelope then finally accepts that the formerly disguised beggar is truly her husband. She kisses Odysseus, who weeps in response. The reunited Odysseus and Penelope visit his father, Laertes. Odysseus recounts his adventures to his father. A group of rebels who are loyal to Antinous and the other suitors attack Odysseus and Laertes. Athena consults Zeus, then intervenes by emanating a terrifying cry. She stops the fight and sends the rebels home. Odysseus tries to follow them, but is halted in his tracks by a thunderbolt from Zeus, who imposes a truce. So Odysseus demonstrates his worthiness to reunite with Penelope by stringing the bow and firing the arrows through the 12 axe shafts. There is a correspondence here with the actions of the hero Rama in the Indian epic poem, the Ramayana. Rama must demonstrate his worthiness to marry Sita by stringing Shiva's bow, which he then snaps as a demonstration of his immense strength. He later uses arrows to destroy the 10-headed Rakshasa, the demon Ravana, a symbol for the dweller on the threshold. The 12 axe shafts, which Odysseus directs the arrow through, are representative of the zodiacal signs and of how the soul has learned the necessary lessons, gained the associated extensions in consciousness conferred by its many incarnations in each of these. The vanquishing of the suitors I relate to what Theosophy calls the fourth initiation and the renouncement of all personality desires. So it is at this advanced stage of evolution that the causal body, the center of soul consciousness, which stores the essence of one's spiritual expression through one's previous physical incarnations, is dissipated. So in this myth, it's a relationship between the hero and the goddess, in this case Athena, that enables Odysseus, a symbol of one treading the path, to ultimately access her secrets in the form of the higher initiation. As monads, we descend downwards into the realm of the goddess as a means of unfolding hitherto latent qualities, and our long evolutionary journey, successfully undertaken, then contributes to the evolution of the great solar being that we are a part of. So Odysseus reunifies with Penelope. This represents the hieros gammus, or sacred marriage of the alchemists, where spirit and matter, male and female, light and dark, are unified. And of course, a reunion of Odysseus with Laertes on Ithaca symbolizes that the monad has returned to its point of origin. Normally, I would do this talk probably more in a discussion workshop format. I hope it hasn't been too abstract. Certainly, writing that chapter in my book was a particularly challenging one, but great fun as well. I always love unpicking symbolism. Thanks very much for having me this evening and giving this talk. It's been very, very enjoyable. Thank you.